Marketer of the day number 409. Feed the beast, find your passions, and thrive in your zone of genius with Corey Poirier. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. We're talking right now, we're actually catching up with a return guest, and his name is Corey Poirier. And if you want to check out his initial appearance on our show, you can find that at marketeroftheday.com/170. That's 170. And Mr. Corey has interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. He's a multiple-time TEDx speaker. He's the host of the top-rated Conversions with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program. We're going to catch up with Mr. Corey and talk about what he's been up to in the past year or so. So, Corey, how are things?
They are going fantastic, Robert. I was just telling you that there's no time for or room for boredom these days, and that's a good thing because people have heard me say for years, I'd rather be busy than bored. So I guess the answer is I'm not bored. So that tells you that things are busy, and I'll add in also productive, because being busy just for the sake of being busy doesn't help anybody.
Right, I completely agree. I had a friend once who got a job with like the local city or something, and he didn't know what to do, and he asked his boss, "What do I do?" And the guy said, "Oh, build some boxes over in that corner. So, like, take some of that cardboard and fold it into boxes." And when he was done, then he went back to the boss, and the boss said, "Take those boxes and break them back down." And and I guess the point of the story was, he can be busy or he can find something to do. It's one thing to sort of grind your gears, spin your wheels, fill up the time, and feel like you're getting something done, but actually being productive is a whole other thing, right?
100%.
Well, great. So last time you were on, you were telling us about how you interviewed all these like top high achievers and thought leaders and figured out all their commonalities. So what have you been up to the last 11, 12 months or so?
So I guess probably, let's see, the biggest things that have been on the go is I'm in the process right now of releasing my latest book, which, we could talk about what the subject, matter is and stuff like that if you want. On top of that, though, I've been doing a lot of speaking, which that part isn't necessarily new, but of course, new clients, new audiences. I spoke at the Podcast Movement Conference just a few weeks ago in Anaheim. That was a first time experience. I also launched our speaking program. I think we've actually run it twice now since I was last on your show. And in fact, it looks like we're going to be running it again in about a month's time for people that were on the waiting list this past time. So lots on the go. So the speaking program is one big one that's current. And then I guess the upcoming release of the book is another one that's current. Those are the two newest things, if you will.
Okay, great. So this new book, what's it called? What's it about?
So it's called The Book of Why. And so that kind of tells you a little bit about what it's about. But it's actually, there's 3 sections to it. And so the first section is related to a question that I've been getting forever. Which is, and you can look at this in 2 ways. How do you find your passion, or how do you find your why? Depending on what word you want to use for that. Really, they're interchangeable in my view. And so, because obviously our show, Conversations with Passion, it's about conversations that really relate to passion areas. And again, now you could insert the word why. So because of that, whether it's related to the show or whether it's related to me delivering talks, people come up afterward all the time and say, hey, I used to have my passion and now I'm struggling to find a new one, or I'm wondering about this passion thing. I've never lived with passion, and I want to know what it feels like. Married to questions like that. So I finally decided that I would address that. And the book was one of the best ways I felt to do that. So the first section is related to your why. And it's broken down further into sections like, first of all, I cover the why. What is it? How do you find it? Examples of other people that found their whys. And then I go into areas like why not? So why shouldn't you do it? Why not you? So why shouldn't it be you? And why not now? Meaning, today with technology, et cetera, it's probably the best time. But then there's a second section that is called Thriving. And it's basically I'll say it the quickest way. It's the actions. It's the actual, after all these interviews I've done, 4,000 plus interviews now, what have I learned are the 5-ish actions that these highest of achievers take, so that people can, instead of trying to learn or remember 100 things, they can just focus on what the highest of achievers are doing. And then the third section is called Enlightened. And the best way to explain that is it's all about what's a more meaningful way to run our businesses, and how can we have a business that at the end of the day doesn't drain us, and we can still get more done and not feel like we're overwhelmed. And then finally, the bonus section in the book is quotes, close to 500 quotes by thought leaders we've interviewed over the years. That's kind of the bonus section. And the idea for each of those quotes was kind of called with the idea that one out of every maybe three or four could transform a life if the quote is viewed properly. So in a nutshell, that's the book. And it's, even though I said all that stuff's included, it's in the 200-page range.
Awesome. So it's split up to these different phases and has these quotes at the end and all this cool stuff. And so the first section is how to find your passion, how to find your why. And would you say that, you mentioned to me before the show and as we're getting started here that that you're just going nonstop. You're doing all the stuff. You're super busy and productive. And it definitely makes me think back to like those first couple of years online when maybe sometimes I would just feel that I would feel burnt out, like people say, and I'd feel like for maybe days or sometimes weeks at a time, nothing was quite working. And sometimes I'd feel like I would just kind of force things, or depending on willpower, or just kind of going and just kind of figuring things out as I went along. And that was really a rough sort of way to go about things. There were lots of ups and downs. I noticed that lately, I don't get so-called burnt out. There might be some days where I'm more motivated than others, but it's definitely easier these days to keep on going. And so, I mean, why do you think that is? And why do you think that is for you? Like, do you think that by having this passion, having this purpose helps us to avoid this burnout or helps us to overcome getting discouraged, stuff like that?
Yeah. So I guess the easy answer is one thing I can tell you for, I'm going to say almost, I can almost say it's a fact that I wouldn't have to be this busy if I didn't enjoy it. So I'm in a situation and it's taken a while to get there, but I can sincerely say that I could, let's say, drop a lot of what I'm doing from a need perspective, but I choose to do it. And when people approach me, this would be a unique way to explain it, but when people approach me about quote unquote business opportunities, maybe they want me to get into their network marketing company or what have you, I can sincerely tell them, and they always say, do you want more of your time back? And I always say, you know what, if I had more of my time back, I would literally fill it back up with more of what I love. So my first part I would say to the answer is, Robert, I kind of choose to stay busy like that. But to answer the second part of your question, that kind of the core part, what if it wasn't my passion area, I wouldn't be able to maintain it. I wouldn't be able to sustain it, and I would feel burnt out, no question. Because I've been there before. I've been down the burnt out road, and it was when I was doing stuff that wasn't as meaningful to me as what I'm doing now. And so what I feel is that there's that cliche quote, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But to take that a step further, we had a guest on our show. He's the star of a show called Trailer Park Boys, the big show for the last 11 years. And then he's also on Haven, which is a big show on the Sci-Fi Network. And he said at the end of a 14-hour day of Haven one time, there were like 2 or 3 16-year-olds that were acting on the set. And they were all sitting there falling asleep, drooling after this long day. And he's 65, and he was kind of like dancing and doing almost a jig. And he said, you know what, let's go out and go to the bars or something like that. And they said, what are you on, old man? Like, how do you got so much energy? And he said, I'm going to teach you something, kids. And he's now been in the industry 40 some years as an actor. And he said, if you figure out if this is your bag, if this is sort of your calling or your why, what you're going to discover is that you won't be tired at the end of the day because you never really worked. And he said, so the reason we get tired usually is because we worked a hard day. He said, I didn't work a hard day. I didn't work at all today. And he said, if I'm not working, then I don't understand how I could be tired at the end of the day. And he said, that's sort of the magic to why I'm never tired. And so to me, that's a better visual than just the cliche of if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So in terms of, is it what sustains me? Is it what gives me that extra oomph? Absolutely. Is it the reason I don't get burnt out? I believe 100% it is. I've often called it vitamin P. So I say I'm fueled by vitamin P, which the P is for passion. And I've jokingly said that it's the one vitamin you can't buy in the store, but it's probably the one that we should be able to buy in the store. So that's a long answer, Robert. But yeah, I feel it's what gives me that extra juice. And at the same time, hopefully I answered the question that it's not that I'm overwhelmed. It's actually that I choose to be productive and busy.
Okay, great. So you loaded it up and you decided to do all that, and I can definitely relate to knowing some of those people who are young but seem to just be out of energy, as opposed to people who are old, who are alive and kicking. Like I saw on Facebook, like you just talked to like William Shatner recently, and he's a great example, right? I mean, what's he, 83, 84 years old, and just like has more energy than a lot of 20, 30-year-olds.
Absolutely. And you can go down a big list of people that you can go back and see that that's the magic formula. They've lived their life with passion. I mean, Louise Hay, who built Hay House, just passed away recently, and I don't have the timeline in front of me, but I think she was in her 60s when she launched Hay House. And Jack Canfield, who co-created the Chicken Soup for the Soul, who we've had on the show, Jack I think was 49 when he launched Chicken Soup for the Soul. I mean, these are ages where a lot of people would say you're winding down, and they were just getting started. And almost their full life, most people that knew them and talked to them said they were, they just basically looked like energy in just as a being. And so, yeah, I would say that, really, if we look at the actors of Hollywood and stuff and musicians and say, how are these people like Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, how are they still going at this stage and stuff? I believe if you look at their one common trait, there's lots of common traits, but if you look at the one most common trait, it's that they are living on purpose and they are living their why.
So you said that your book gives examples and tells people how to find that why. Can you share what yours is, or at least share like what are some good examples of a purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. So mine, I'll do my best to give it some justice, but basically, in a nutshell, my personal mission statement, which ties into my why, my personal mission statement is to be the guy who motivates, donates, inspires, educates, and entertains. So those are my five, my rule of five. If I'm doing most of those during any activity I'm doing, then I'm living on purpose. And then, but now, what is the actual why or purpose in my view? My why is to create positive ripples or a positive invisible impact in other people's lives. So if I wanted to reword that, I would use the term Steve Jobs used when he said what our purpose here should be is to put a dent in the universe. So my goal, if I paraphrase his, is that I want to put a positive dent in the universe, whether you call that an invisible ripple or an invisible impact, as long as it's a positive one, even if I never get to see or experience some of the people who actually felt it, then at least that's my why. I'm living on purpose. If I go to a company one, which might be easier for people to get examples from, if you look at Harley Davidson. So Harley Davidson is in motorcycles, they're crushing it. I mean, they got, obviously their market share is vastly above their competitors. Well, as a comparison, Indian as a bike, when I ask people about motorbikes who ride motorbikes, they tell me Indian makes a better quality motorbike. But Indian isn't even touching the surface of Harley's market share. So the question is why? Well, I believe it's because Harley understands what they do. Indian makes a motorbike, and I mean, most people say that's what they do. And I think Indian believes we make a good motorbike. Whereas Harley says, you know what, we don't even sell motorcycles. What we sell, and this is a Harley quote, is the ability for a 43-year-old accountant to drive around wearing black leather, pull up into a town where nobody knows him, and have them be terrified of him. What that is a lifestyle. So Harley sells a lifestyle. So their why is helping people live a lifestyle. And so that's more than riding a motorbike. You could maybe even call that an experience. But that's what Harley sells. So that's their why. If you go to Disney, and by the way, this one here, Harley's, that's actually been sort of studied. That's their why. But Disney, I've never heard anybody say this, but I'm pretty confident in saying what Disney's why is based on what their purpose statement is and based on their tagline in their commercials. But if you think about it, Disney says as a purpose, our purpose is to make people, and they used to say especially children, happy. Now they just say to make people happy. That's their mission statement over 50 years. And their advertisements say the happiest place on earth. So I think it's safe to say that Disney's why is to make people happy every day. So that's three examples, Robert. One from my own life, one from Disney, who is, again, me speculating from the outside in, and one that's directly, I think, from Simon Sinek's Start With Why, the Harley example. The only thing I added in was I compared it to Indian, which I don't know if they did, but the bottom line is I think that's a good reference comparing two companies that are pretty much the two biggest companies in that industry, but yet one is the lion's share, and I think that's why. And you could do the same with Apple computers versus Dell and look at the two differences. And I think it's because Dell sells their what and Apple sells their why. So, Robert, hopefully that helped outline it a bit.
Yeah, it does. And so you listed those examples, and are there sort of like any like do's and don'ts when coming up with this why? Because the thing that usually tripped me up is sometimes I'd hear other people's whys, and people would say things like, I want to like donate, all this money to saving the whales, or all this money to curing cancer. And I'm thinking like, whoa, like I hadn't even thought things that far ahead. Or sometimes when I would think of what I thought a why was, it was more like a goal. Like I would write down, like what I wanted my income to be, or if I wanted like a certain house or a car. And I feel like that's kind of off track as well. So, I mean, is there certain criteria or certain things that this why has to have, or things that it shouldn't have?
Well, first I'll say And this is something I just had an interview with somebody yesterday who it's taken him 10 years to figure out truly what his why is. And interestingly enough, when I was chatting with him at the 6 and 7 year mark, he had built this company like a franchise from day one, even though it's not franchised. And his goal was, because he had run 2 franchises before, build it so that I can sell it later and add extra value because I built it like a franchise. And so, of course, that means mapping out all your systems, his logo, everything looks like a franchise. And until 3 years ago, he was still telling me when I sell it, what we're going to do when we sell. And so it was all focused on selling it. And then he told me yesterday in an interview, in the last 3 years, he's truly discovered their why. And once that happened, he has no desire to sell it anymore. Because I asked him, I said, things seem so different, Jeff. Before you were talking all the time about sell, and now you're talking all about the future and succession, and now his son's in the business. And so what I would first say is don't be discouraged if you don't find your why in a week, because you hear something that says to make people happy. And even though that might have been that might have been an amalgamation of hundreds of people coming up with that. I think it was probably Walt Disney himself. But even if it were hundreds of people and it took them months and months, and it still sounds simple. So you hear it and you go, well, why can't I come up with something that easy or simple? But what I'm getting at is with Apple, it took them years to evolve there. Harley, they actually said their market share went up when they finally shared that statement I told you, the 43-year-old accountant. So Harley didn't know that at first and spent years spinning their wheels. So my point is, even the largest of companies who have the biggest of whys now, you could add in Starbucks as well, it took them years to find it. So first of all, Robert, I would say for somebody thinking about making theirs, it all starts with some words on a paper, but it doesn't have to be complete when you put it together. So I just want people to, first of all, not get discouraged. Myself, that why I shared with you, I've been doing this just on the speaking side for 15 years, and I would guesstimate it was about 7 years ago whenever I finally felt like I knew what that was, what I defined to you. I could actually say most of that. So first of all, don't get discouraged. Secondly, in terms of rules, I don't think there's any hard and fast rules, but I think what happens is you as a person evolves till a point where you see, here's why I'm doing this. And then it's easier to put it into words. But at the same time, I think it's beneficial to start the process even when you haven't figured out your why. So I don't want to take away from that. So I would say where it really starts is brainstorming, putting notes on a piece of paper. If you want to really get finely tuned, maybe, and so this is what I've done in the past and helped other people do, is ask your customers. So survey your customers and say, why do you buy from me? And what do you get when you buy from me? Or why do you make decisions? And maybe you find out the customers you're attracting all buy, and you went back to sort of the greater good, they all buy because they feel like they're giving back to somebody, by buying from you. So let's say they buy from a certain brand because that brand donates a percentage to a needing country. So what I'm getting at is if you survey your customers and figure out why you're attracting certain customers, there's going to be probably hints that'll come up. So as an example for myself, as a speaker, I always hand out surveys. So I'm actually getting surveys done weekly from customers directly. And so when I'd ask people, what did you take from today, or what was your view of today? The word that kept coming up over and over again, long before we launched the show, was passion and purpose and why. So for me, I recognized that my why had to be focused on our surrounding, helping people find their passion or their why. And then what happened is I started asking myself, well, what am I doing by doing that? Well, first of all, I'm creating a ripple, because if they can find their why, then they're helping more people more passionately, and other people are going to want to know how to do it, and maybe they share what I showed them. So then that's where the ripple came in. So I would say a good starting point is, if you're having a struggle yourself writing on a piece of paper and brainstorming yourself, maybe bring somebody else in to brainstorm with you, and then if you want to put that on steroids, then start reaching out to your customers and saying, why do you buy from me? Why do you make buying decisions in the first place? What matters to you? And see if patterns come up. And if they do, that could give you a hint to what's driving you. And then if you can figure out what's driving you, then you'll probably get closer to figuring out what your why is.
I like it, and that's very interesting in a number of ways. That number one, our why might not be fully formed yet, or it changes over time, so it's okay if we don't have it right away. And then also bringing other people in and hearing what people have to say about us, or what people think about us. That's always drastically different from what we think about ourselves. So really good advice there, just to ask our customers, why did you buy from me? What do you think of me, to get those keywords, or see what those sort of commonalities and patterns are. And that way you're measuring what people think of you based on what you've done, not just on some clever phrase or something that you thought of. So super great. And so I don't want us to go too far over time, but you mentioned in that book that you list in the thriving section, you list the 5 actions that these high achievers take. And when you were on the show last year, you said that there was 3 aspects. There was like number 1 was focus or the ability to go all in. Number 2, these high achievers are all lifelong learners and leaders. And number 3, they live with passion. They found that purpose. So these 5 actions the high achievers take, like, is it at all related to that list of 3, or is it something brand new? Like, what are these 5 actions these high achievers take?
Yeah, so I would say, Robert, they are related to those. So, for example, when you mentioned lifelong learners or leaders, that's the common trait I discovered, and then the action they take. What I dive into in the book is how they do that. So, as an example, you can build your own, whether it's formal or informal learning plan. So, what could that look like? That could be you decide that, and you can put whatever timeline you want. It could be daily, it could be twice a week. You could decide I'm going to watch a TED talk every Tuesday and Thursday, let's say. So that's part of your learning plan now. You're learning, 20 minutes a day, twice a week, let's say, just from watching TED Talks. You might go a step further and say, okay, and I also want to, and then you can add more into your learning plan. Like you could say, I'm going to read Success Magazine monthly, or whatever that looks like to you. So in terms of, first of all, yes, those 3 common traits are 3 of the 5. But then the secondary part is how do we actually get there? So for instance, the going all in and the focus, then I go into strategy, like just as a random one, but there's all kinds. This is obviously just one example, but it even goes from the difference of, do you have your phone on all the time so that when you're in with customers, it's ringing or buzzing on your hip or what have you, or do you have it forwarded somewhere, or do you have it in the car? So in other words, do you go all in? Are you focused on the person, or are you always splitting your attention? And then I go in and make the case for single tasking. I've said that single tasking should be the new sexy. And I go in and talk about the statistics that demonstrate why single tasking makes sense. And so yes, it's those type of actions and those same sort of common strategies and traits that I discovered. But it's actually going further in and deeper into how do we actually play them out and act them out. So in fairness, because you asked about the 5, the 4th one would be getting outside our comfort zone. And so I go into, first of all, the benefits, the fact that all the growth happens outside our comfort zone, the fact that almost all of these high achievers started with a tiny little comfort zone, just like every one of us listening right now, and grew their comfort zone step by step. Even if we see them at a level like you think of Jerry Seinfeld and you think, well, this guy is a master comic, but you didn't see the 20 years it took him to get an hour of material that works. And so you didn't see those first nights where he was bombing horribly. Rain Pryor I interviewed a number of years ago, and she's the daughter of the iconic Richard Pryor. And I asked her how hard it was growing up in his shadow, because she's a comedian as well. And she said, Corey, it made it a lot easier when he brought me to the local clubs in New York and what have you, and I watched him bomb night after night. And he was trying new material, and yet we'd see a HBO special or what have you where he's killing it and think that's him always. But she'd go to the club and see people heckling him and see him deliver a joke to silence. And so she witnessed that. So it made it easier for him not to be in her shadow. But it also shows you he was still stepping outside his comfort zone, even at a time when he didn't have to. But he wasn't going to grow and have new material had he not taken those steps, of course, outside his comfort zone. So that's another one. That'd be like the 4th one. And the 5th one would be the fact that they know how to hire for their weaknesses. So they've really focused in on what their strengths are. And then they know how to, whether it's delegate, whether it's hire, whether it's, focus on certain priorities first, they know how to really put the strength and focus on the areas that we'll call it their genius zone. The areas where they're a genius in and where they actually can impact the most people. And so then the other areas, they figure out ways to sort of fill in the blanks. I mean, if you go way back to Henry Ford, he had people hired. I mean, there was actually a story in Think and Grow Rich where Napoleon Hill shared that a person, basically, they were trying to show that Henry Ford, what they called at the time, they were trying to say he was ignorant because he didn't have knowledge about this or that. And finally, he got flustered in the court and he said, well, why would I fill my brain with stuff like that whenever I can push a button in my office and somebody will come in and get the answer for me? And, Einstein, also, I remember hearing one time that Einstein, when people would ask his home address, he never memorized it. And he said, why would I fill my head with something that I don't need to know because I know how to get there every day? And so my point being is that in school, we're taught to focus on our weaknesses and ignore our strengths because we're already good in them. But if you want to look and say what's distinct about the highest of achievers, they do the exact opposite. They say, you know what, I don't like that. It's my weakness, but I also don't enjoy it. I mean, if it's the case that they don't want to learn it, how to do it, I don't enjoy it, I don't like it. So why would I put my attention there? I'm going to focus on the things that are going to move the needle. So there's your 5, Robert. And like I said, the difference is I shared them with you on kind of the surface level last time, but in the book, obviously, we go heavily into how you actually execute on them.
Super great, and I like how you go into how to actually apply and implement these things, because it's one thing to say, oh, we'll learn all the time, but then these sound like very interesting strategies here to say, like, I'll carve out this amount of time every day or every week, or I'll make it a point to read this magazine. And so that last point you mentioned there about hiring for your weaknesses, did you struggle with this, or did you have sort of a learning curve or a growing pains to finally just make that decision to hire out? Because this is the kind of problem that I've been more and more aware of this over the last year or two, that, I outsource a little bit, but I definitely should have been outsourcing a lot more and been outsourcing early. So, I mean, did you kind of go through a similar sort of realization that maybe you were doing too much on your own, or you were doing too many of the things that you're weak in or that you don't enjoy, and you had to make a change?
So interestingly enough, yes, I still struggle now with this one. This is out of the 5. It's interesting you picked this one because I think a lot more people struggle with this one than mostly, especially entrepreneurs and especially solo entrepreneurs. And I still struggle with it in the sense that I absolutely hire for the areas that I don't enjoy, like accounting is not my thing at all. And and even marketing, I might be involved in it, but I'll usually consult other branding experts, or I'll get them to help me execute on plans. Website, I absolutely do not have anything to do with website design. And I could go down list by list of the things that I don't enjoy. And I've found people to do actually doing even design of brochures and all that. I used to try to do it myself. Then I try to work with a graphic designer, but me still there. And eventually I realized that years ago, what I would have done probably is hire somebody specifically to do that. But now with things like Upwork and Fiverr and all these options that we have where we can actually freelance it out one job at a time, I found that to be amazing. And what I do is once I find somebody that does a really good job at it, I just stick with them. So it's almost like I have an assistant who's just there whenever I need a project done. And so even like when we talk about my books, with my books now, I have an editor that I work with every time, full-time editor who I know personally. But when it comes to the formatting and it comes to the design of the cover, I go to things like Upwork and I find a freelancer. So now my last 3 books with the cover, I've had the same person. With the formatting, I've had the same person. So yeah, I can say 100% that I, as you said, about farm out a lot of stuff. But the problem I run into, my biggest challenge still, is I am a multi-passionate person. So I still keep adding more logs onto the fire. And that's where my struggle is. So for instance, I love doing things like this. I love media. Well, that becomes a whole entity of, I'm not doing the scheduling of it per se, all of it, but I'm still doing the media appearances. But then I'm a speaker. That's my core, always been my core passion. So I'm out speaking regularly. Then we have our show, and then I'm doing that regularly. And we have the speaking program I mentioned we launched, and the writing. So I mentioned that, yeah, I believe we should focus on, and I believe this firmly, on our passions and our strengths. But most people, thankfully, don't keep finding new ones like I do. But me, I'm passionate about a lot of areas. So the challenge I have is, even though I'm only in my genius zone all the time, I feel the challenge is I have too many genius zone areas, and so that's my struggle. These are things that I don't want to give up. Like I've thought off and on about, do I bring on a new host for our show? But I'm so obsessed by interviewing people. I feel like I'm losing a part of me. So then I've looked, do I bring on certain interviews that I've always wanted to do and then farm out the rest? But then I worry, does it hurt the show because people are hearing different hosts all the time? So what I'm saying is where I have the struggle is the areas that are my strengths, letting go of any of those and not adding more in.
Interesting. And what I like about the way that you're describing your thought process there is you're listing out very specific decisions. And I think that, you have a lot of people who maybe they make big, huge, grandiose plans, and they say, like, I'm going to like you said, like they say, I'm going to do the speaking and I have this show and that show, and it's just on paper only. And it's like, well, it's not very, very clear. But it sounds like what you've done is you kind of mastered one part of it and got it down and ramped it up and done the speaking a bunch. Well, cool. Now based on what you outsource and what the system is and what you do, that's based on what you've figured out all along, right? Kind of like you mentioned, like the comedians who early on they bomb because they're still figuring out what it is that they're good at or that they enjoy, things like that. And once you did that, then you ramped up the podcast. But what I really like about the way that you were just kind of talking about that is that you say, okay, well, there's choice like A, B, C, or D, as opposed to some people out there who are just like, there's a billion choices or things like that. So it sounds like just the way that you make these decisions, or the way that you figure out, okay, well, is this project, is this going to keep going, or we're going to change it, or we're going to get rid of it? It sounds like those decisions you make are based on the facts that happen, based on you figuring it out as you went along.
Yeah, 100%. And what I will say as well, Robert, and this is, I think, an important note, because the one thing whenever I say, I have these multi passions, you worry that some people will hear that and say, okay, well, then, as they say, if you do a whole bunch of things, it's hard to do one of them well. Well, I think that can be the case if they're unrelated. So, in other words, if you're, as a weird example, but if let's say if you're running I'm just going to use an example, you're running a restaurant, and then you have let's say a training business, and then you also, I'm just using an example, you're an inventor, and so they're all sort of in some ways unrelated from each other. I think that's where you run into trouble. The one thing I can say that I've been lucky and blessed with is all of my passions kind of feed the same inner, inner, let's say, desire. So if I have this thing I call a spider web method, where people can use it to develop ideas. You can use it to develop talks. And basically in the center, it would have, for example, Corey or Robert, whoever the person is. I would draw this on a piece of paper, and then I would add the legs. So if I looked and said, okay, what am I trying to do? And so maybe in the middle, I put, I'm trying to deliver on this why of creating an invisible impact. And then I would put the legs in and say, now, what are the ways that I can do this? If I listed them all out, like things I mentioned, like writing, speaking, doing media, if I look at that, the one thing about it is all of those feed that thing properly the same way. So they're all equal, and they all kind of, I guess you could say, they're all related enough that they're all serving the same purpose. I'm just actually doing them in different ways. So I think that's the important note as well, is even though it might seem like it's clustered because I'm doing all these things, they all completely are actually serving the same purpose. If you wanted to get right down to giving it a purpose, it's all different ways for me to share the messages that I'm learning by doing these interviews with high achievers.
I like it. So when you're talking about having all these related multi passions, you're saying that like by doing the interviews and doing the podcast and doing the speaking and doing the writing, that's all building the same skill. That's all working the same part of your brain.
Yeah, that's how it feels to me. And like I said, if I compare it and look at even the audience I'm reaching, the feedback I get from people comes in the same way. So if I write an article that somebody enjoys, the feedback that I might get via Facebook or LinkedIn or an email would be similar to the feedback I get if they saw me do a talk. So it really it really, if we call it a beast, it really feels like I'm feeding the same beast.
Cool. And so would you say that if someone was, say, like a musician plus a marketer who did speaking, or if they, like I also think about like, when I was building my online business and I also had a day job and I learned certain like programming skills at a day job, but then also apply them to the business, would those also be like two different examples of kind of having those interrelated passions, even though they're sort of being used in different ways?
Yeah, so this is an area I'm partial to. I don't talk about this much because I have truly put it on the back burner slash hiatus. But the other sides of my life, if I look at other related passions, I'm a musician, so it's interesting you say that. My last CD I put out in 2014, and I used to even promote that the CD was nominated for Rock Recording of the Year because I thought, well, it shows I'm basically having success in multiple disciplines. The comedy, I mentioned comedy probably because I spent 7 years performing stand-up comedy, roughly 900 times. So those are areas that whenever I was feeding the same beast, I could actually find ways to show they were doing the same, they were related. So the comedy, I mentioned my 5 personal mission things, like I mentioned the donate, inspire, motivate, educate, entertain. Well, I can do a lot of those from a stand-up comedy stage. But yet, if you look at them as disciplines, most people would say they're completely unrelated. So it really depends how you look at them personally. I would make the argument that comedy, stand up, is what helped me get better as a professional speaker. So to me, it's sort of feeding the same thing. If you look at it, being a musician, it's still your creativity muscle, and it's still also I'm communicating a message in front of an audience. So I believe, yeah, I mean, if you go musician, marketer, I believe you can find a way to show that they're both related. and make them both related so that it's not like you're going in separate directions. I think it really comes back to yourself personally figuring out for you, do they relate and how can you relate them? Like I said, I think you also can recognize, if one of them is running a business where you're selling widgets, and the other one is, volunteering for a cause where it takes you on missions, and they're both completely pulling at you in different ways. I'm not saying you shouldn't do both, but it's harder, I think, to relate maybe those unless you tie in, the products that you're doing as a way to give back to that same mission you're doing. Like, for example, you donate a percentage of the profits. So you probably can find a way to tie them both together if you work hard enough. But I think for me, the ones that I'm doing, really, you can show how they relate, and they really do feed the same quote unquote beast. And yeah, I could say as well the same with a musician and marketing. You could definitely tie them together, and you maybe can make yourself unique by being the person that does both of those rather than the one person that does only either or.
Super interesting. I mean, lots of ways to make it work, right? Like either with like the business plus the hobby, or multiple skills you're building. So super cool stuff, and lots of interesting things to think about. And so can you let us know, like, if someone listened to our conversation today and they say, man, this Book of Why sounds amazing, where will they be able to get it, or where can they get it once this is all live?
So I'll tell you the website, Robert. The easiest way to find it is on thebookofwhy.com. So it's a pretty easy website to remember, thebookofwhy.com. And if they go over and visit the website, it's like, as we're doing this interview right now, the book isn't live, but we're really close to when it will be. So depending on when they hear it, the book might be available right at that time. But worst case, if it's not, when they get to the website, they can still join our tribe, and they'll be among the first to find out the second the book drops.
Super great. And so is the Book of Why the only place people should go after listening to us today, or is there any other place they should go as well?
Well, what I'll say is, hopefully they want to grab a copy of the book or learn more about the book. But if they're not, if that's not, doesn't speak to them. And I should mention too, we're releasing it with an audio compilation because some people aren't readers. So I was about to say, if you're not a reader, but even if you're not a reader, we're going to have an option for you. But let's say you want to just connect with me further. You want to reach out to learn more about, what I do. You just even want to be buddies on social media, whatever that option might be. I would say probably the best hub to go to would be CoreyPoirier.com. And so that's CoreyPoirier.com, and go there. And that's really where you can find interviews I've done. If that's your thing, if you love listening to interviews, there's literally hundreds of hours of interviews on the page. On the website, there's a video they can watch. You can see my TEDx talks there, links to social media. So I would really call that sort of the central hub.
All right, great. So that central hub is CoreyPoirier.com to get to all the social media links and everything Corey's working on. And then the Book of Why is the real place to be if you want to find your passion, want to beef up that passion, want to know the why, want to know those 5 actions high achievers take, and then even the ways that they then become enlightened and more meaningful. We made sure to leave that out. That way you'll be thirsty enough to go and check out the book. So go and check out the book at thebookofwhy.com. Whether it's available for you now or it's not quite ready yet, you can join the tribe. But it's probably pretty fun and interesting game to go there right now and see at whatever point in time you're listening, is the book live or not? And so lots of things to think about, lots of things that we all need to be doing. And maybe they're even lessons or tips or things that maybe we heard about in the past or maybe used to do, but then forgot to do, or maybe some things fell to the wayside because sometimes life gets in the way. And so many times we're our own worst enemy, or we make things way more harder on ourselves than it has to be. So if you feel like there's just too much chaos, too much of a mess, too much stress, not enough discipline, not enough action, not enough fulfillment, like too much or not enough of something in your life, then you're going to want to check out this book, thebookofwhy.com by Mr. Corey Poirier. And thanks for stopping by the show, Corey, for giving us all these things to think about, for sharing all these life lessons that you've got from your own experience, your own speaking, 4,000 plus interviews, lots of great stuff. And I appreciate you coming by and doing it.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I want to also extend a thanks for all the great work you're doing, because I think at the end of the day, the more people that are putting these messages out there and reaching an audience with a powerful and inspirational message, the better chance we're all creating these invisible impacts in the world and making the world a better place. So thank you for all the great work you're doing as well.
We really appreciate you listening to today's episode of Marketer of the Day. Subscribe to us on iTunes and rate and review us at marketeroftheday.com/